Hello, everyone. My name is Grace Kibombwe, and I will be presenting my final project in healthcare law and ethics, and it's on injustice in healthcare. And the case I will be presenting today is Carter v. Prime Healthcare Paradise Valley, LLC. Now, before we get started, I want you to just ask yourself this question. What does health injustice mean to you? Think about it for a second and think about what it means to you. Before I talk about health injustice, I would like to share a quote by Martin Luther King Jr., which says, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane." So health injustice, it can be in many forms. There is, of course, discrimination by either sex, sexual orientation, by race, by ethnicity, by nationality, language, disability status, and socioeconomic status. It can also be by stereotyping. Health injustice can often result in inappropriate or poor treatment, a denial of rights or denial of claim to societal, institutional, or organizational benefits, including access to information, health services, status, or other societal resources. My case is focused on health injustice in the elder care community, which is one of the many issues in health injustice. So the relevance to healthcare administrators is that they should be able to recognize elder care abuse. They should bring awareness to the staff and the corporation. They should focus on educating everyone, as well as protecting the elderly, and do staff training. And I think staff training should be continuous, either on a yearly basis based on elder abuse. Now, elder abuse is described as an intentional act or failure to act that causes or creates a risk of harm to an older adult age 60 or older. And according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 1 in 10 people aged 60 and older experience elder abuse. And between the years 2002 to 2016, there have been more than 643,000 older adults that were treated in the emergency department for non-fatal assaults, and over 19,000 homicides have occurred. So this is pretty significant, and that's why, as healthcare administrators, we should take this seriously. So the case, as I stated earlier, that I'll be presenting today is Carter v. Prime Healthcare Paradise Valley. Now, in this case, the plaintiff, Carter, who is the granddaughter of Grant, initiated this action against the hospital and the center in 2009. The plaintiffs alleged 3 separately labeled causes of action against the hospital. First and foremost, they alleged that violations of the Elder Abuse and Dependent Adult Civil Protection Act. Secondly, willful misconduct. And thirdly, wrongful death, which was caused by recklessly, willfully, and with deliberate indifference and conscious disregard for the health, safety, and well-being of Grant. I now present to you the facts of the case. On April 21st, 2008, Grant, an 87-year-old man, was admitted to the hospital due to chest pains. Prior to that, 2 months before, he had undergone hip surgery and he was in good health. And 2 days later, Grant was transferred to a nursing skilled facility for rehabilitation therapy. He was then continually neglected while at the nursing skilled facility. And examples of negligence toward Grant included that he was being put in front of a fan to air dry after he was given a bath. And sometimes this happened even in the winter months. So due to this, Grant developed pneumonia. He was also not provided with sufficient nutrition and hydration. And due to this negligence, Grant began to get weaker and weaker, and he developed pneumonia, sepsis, pressure ulcers on his back as well. On May 6, 2008, Grant was admitted to another hospital for the treatment of pneumonia, sepsis, and pressure ulcers. He was then discharged and he returned to the facility for another 3 months, where the neglect continued because he was being isolated and he was not being repositioned or properly bathed. On August 18, 2008, Grant was once again admitted to the hospital for a third time. The hospital failed to administer Grant any medication, including antibiotics. Carter also claimed that Grant died due to the hospital's abuse, neglect, and fraud, as well as the failure to have an endotracheal tube so he could be intubated to save his life. So we'll now look at the legal basis for this ruling and why the courts ruled the way that they did. The court ruled that there was insufficient evidence to support the criteria for Elder Abuse Act based on neglect. The court did not find that the allegations held up to be egregious enough to warrant elder abuse. So the court entered a judgment in favor of the hospital and against the plaintiff's Carter. The court ruled first that the allegations of the elder abuse claim did not constitute neglect within the meaning of the Elder Abuse Act. So Carter presented the case, but it didn't fit according to the Elder Abuse Act. There is no separate cause of action for willful misconduct. And thirdly, the willful misconduct and wrongful death claims arose from the hospital's provision of professional services and were barred by the statute of limitations. So the plaintiff in this case, Grant's daughter, had the duty to prove by clear and convincing evidence that the neglect caused the elder or dependent adult to suffer physical harm, pain, or mental suffering. The courts also stated that the hospital had provided adequate treatment because the staff had worked to save Grant's life and that various conditions were diagnosed and Grant was discharged. The court ruled that the hospital did not cause harm. So the court's decision, was it right or was it wrong? I guess it really depends, but a lack of evidence was the basis for ruling against the plaintiff who had filed the case under the Elder Abuse Act. And the courts could have at least considered negligence at the very least, even if the case was presented under the Elder Abuse Act and the court said it didn't fit the criteria. However, the Elder Abuse and Dependent Adult Civil Protection Act defines elder abuse as defines abuse of an elder to include, but not limited to, neglect, abandonment, and isolation. And in my opinion, I feel that Grant suffered all three of these during his care. He was neglected after he was given a bath. So sort of like he was abandoned. They left him sitting after he takes a bath. He's wet and it's cold, even in the winter months. Sometimes he was left in isolation and he didn't know where he was. So in my opinion, I feel that at least the court should have looked at the negligence towards Grant a little bit more seriously. And so the reason why I chose this case was because, many elderly people suffer at the hands of their caretakers. I have friends that personally work in elder care homes, and I've heard good stories and I've heard bad stories. So I've heard firsthand from people that work there what goes on and what happens to elderly that are abused. And I also chose it because it was such a good example of healthcare injustice based on age discrimination, so discrimination against the elderly. So even though Carter could not prove the abuse of a loved one, it doesn't mean that it did not occur. A case like this is very relevant to healthcare administrators to ensure that management makes every effort to provide training on elder abuse for all elder care health workers and report abuse when they see it. I have a references page regarding anything that I referred to in the presentation. And just in closing, as healthcare administrators, we really should represent and stand for people that don't have a voice in looking at the elder care abuse. We want to be able to speak for them. We want to be able to implement ways that prevent elder abuse care, whether it be training our staff, reporting elder abuse when you see it. We as administrators should stand, for health justice for all, especially, the underprivileged, the elderly, those that are discriminated against. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all and have a great afternoon.